Scene script. Have you ever wondered what if the US dollar collapses? Sounds like a nightmarish scenario, doesn't it? But why are we even asking this question? Well, to understand that, we need to journey back to the mid-20th century, to the year 1944. A monumental agreement known as the Bretton Woods Agreement was signed. This agreement, inked by 44 countries, gave birth to a financial giant, the US dollar. The agreement established the dollar as the world's reserve currency, a title it has held on to for over 7 decades. This position of dominance wasn't just a fancy title. It came with a host of benefits that the US enjoyed and continues to enjoy. One of the most significant being the privilege of lower transaction costs. With the dollar being universally accepted, it eliminated the need for currency conversion and the costs associated with it. But that's not all. The dollar's supremacy also meant that the US could borrow money at lower interest rates. How, you might ask? Well, with the dollar as the world's reserve currency, countries around the world were more than willing to lend to the US, knowing they would be paid back in the same strong and stable currency. This led to the US enjoying lower borrowing costs, a benefit that has fueled its economic growth for decades. In essence, the Bretton Woods Agreement was akin to a coronation ceremony, crowning the US dollar as a global economic giant, a giant that dictated terms, influenced policies, and shaped economies, a giant that was seemingly invincible. So, the US dollar started as a giant towering over other currencies, but where is it standing today? Fast forward to today, the US dollar is still the world's top reserve currency, but is it as dominant as it once was? The US dollar, once the unchallenged king of the global economy, now finds itself in a precarious position. The signs are subtle but undeniable. The most glaring of these is the growing US public debt balance. At a staggering $32 trillion, it's a figure that's hard to ignore. This isn't just a number, it's a ticking time bomb. If not addressed, it could have profound implications for the dollar's status as the world's top reserve currency. Then we have the debt-to-GDP ratio. This is a measure of a country's debt compared to its overall economic output, and it's projected to reach a jaw-dropping 181% in the next 30 years. To put that into perspective, that's nearly double the size of the entire US economy. This is a clear indicator that the US needs to get its fiscal house in order if it wants to maintain the dollar's dominance. But it's not just about the numbers. The dollar has also seen a slight weakening against rival currencies. This may not seem like a big deal in the short term, but over time, these small shifts can add up, and in the competitive world of global finance, even the smallest advantage can make a huge difference. Now let's be clear. The dollar is still the most widely used currency in global transactions and foreign reserves. It's far from being dethroned, but the cracks are starting to show. The once invincible dollar is showing signs of vulnerability. So the dollar, while still dominant, is showing signs of strain, and this has led to speculation about its potential downfall. But what could possibly topple the mighty dollar? There are a few contenders. Let's start with the geopolitical landscape. Countries like China and Russia are making strategic moves to distance themselves from the dollar. They're not alone in this shift. A wave of de-dollarization is sweeping across several nations, with countries exploring alternatives to reduce their reliance on the dollar. This trend could weaken the dollar's stronghold as the world's top reserve currency. Then there's the elephant in the room, the US's ballooning public debt. The numbers are staggering, with the public debt balance having reached $32 trillion. If left unchecked, the debt-to-GDP ratio is projected to skyrocket to a whopping 181% in the next 30 years. This is eerily reminiscent of the decline of the British sterling in the early 20th century, partly due to mounting debt from the world wars. Is history about to repeat itself with the dollar? Only time will tell. Another potential threat comes from the digital world, cryptocurrencies. Bitcoin, Ethereum, and other digital currencies are gaining traction as alternative forms of payment. They offer a level of decentralization and privacy that traditional currencies can't match. As more people embrace these digital currencies, the dollar's dominance could be threatened. Then there's a possibility of a rival currency stepping into the spotlight. The euro, the yuan, or perhaps a yet-to-be-introduced global digital currency could take the lead. If the US doesn't address its economic and political challenges, the dollar's global role could be at stake. So the dollar is facing threats from multiple fronts, but is its downfall imminent? The downfall of the dollar, it's a concept that's hard to grasp, but is it really that far-fetched? Let's take a moment to rewind the clock all the way back to the early 20th century when the British sterling was the world's dominant currency. At the time, Britain was a global superpower, much like the United States is today. However, as the world wars took their toll, Britain found itself sinking under the weight of mounting debt, and the once mighty sterling began to falter. Fast forward to the present day, and we find ourselves in a somewhat similar situation with the US dollar. The US, like Britain of old, is grappling with a growing debt problem. The country's public debt balance has now reached a staggering $32 trillion. And if trends continue, the debt-to-GDP ratio is projected to reach a whopping 181% in the next 30 years. Former IMF official Barry Eichengreen has weighed in on this issue, suggesting that the dollar's global role, much like the sterling's in the past, will depend on the U.S. bringing its debt under control. But it's not just about the numbers. Eichengreen also points to the need for political stability and economic recovery, factors that could make or break the dollar's dominance. Now, it's crucial to note that despite the challenges, the dollar isn't down and out, not by a long shot. It remains the most widely used currency in global transactions and foreign reserves. But the question remains, can it hold on to its crown? Rival economies like China and Russia are making moves away from the dollar, and this could pose a threat to its global dominance. The sterling story is a cautionary tale about how quickly fortunes can change when economic and political pressures mount. So the downfall of the dollar, while not a certainty, is a possibility, and that's a thought worth pondering. So, we've taken a journey from the rise of the dollar to its current state and looked at the potential threats to its dominance. We've seen how the birth of a giant, the United States, gave rise to the dollar as a dominant global currency. We've examined the current state of the dollar, its position in the world, and the integral part it plays in global transactions and foreign reserves. We delved deep into the threats that could potentially undermine this dominance. Countries like China and Russia are moving away from the dollar, and there are concerns that a rival currency could take its place. The real risk, however, isn't from these rivals, but from within. The growing U.S. debt is a looming shadow that could potentially destabilize the dollar's standing. We then ventured into the realm of hypotheticals, looking at the potential downfall of the dollar. The decline of the British sterling in the early 20th century serves as a stark reminder of what can happen when a nation's debt spirals out of control. We've seen how the U.S. public debt balance has reached a staggering $32 trillion, with the debt-to-GDP ratio projected to reach a whopping 181% in the next 30 years. These are numbers that cannot be ignored. This brings us to the crux of our discussion, the importance of the U.S. addressing its debt problems to keep the dollar dominant. Formidable former IMF official Barry Eichengreen warns that the dollar's global role will hinge on the U.S. bringing its debt under control and improving its economic and political situation. The potential downfall of the dollar. It's a complex issue with no easy answers. But one thing is clear, the future of the dollar is inextricably linked to the economic and political decisions made by the U.S.